from the book of Joshua, chapter 5, verses 13 and 14, and chapter 6, verses 1 through 5 in the Common English Bible. When Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up. He caught sight of a man standing in front of him, with his sword drawn. Joshua went up and said to him, "Are you on our side or that of our enemies?" He said, "Neither. I am the commander of the Lord's heavenly force. Now I have arrived." Then Joshua showed reverence and said to him, "What is my master saying to his servant?" Now Jericho was closed up tightly because of the Israelites. No one went out or came in. The Lord said to Joshua, "Look, I have given Jericho and its king and into your power, along with its mighty warriors. Circle the city with all the soldiers, going around the city one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets made from ram's horns in front of the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day, circle the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. Have them blow a long blast on the ram's horn. As soon as you hear the trumpets blast, have all the people shout out a loud war cry. Then the city wall will collapse, and the people will rise up, attacking straight ahead." Again, that's Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 and 14, and chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Today, we're talking about tearing down the wall. Over the past few years, there's been a lot of talk about a certain wall, and more recently, a lot of talk about a certain virus. But guess what? We aren't going to be talking about either one of those things today. But in case they're worrying you, today's lessons might help you work more effectively with the challenges and uncertainties that you may be experiencing in your life today, especially with the pandemic we're in and the troubling events we've been observing around the country. Some of humanity's biggest frailties are related to fear. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of losing control. Today's discussion and our scripture deal with some of these things and how to overcome them. The story in our scripture takes place in a time following Moses' death, when the Israelites are preparing to cross the Jordan River and enter the land of Canaan, also known as the Promised Land. But there are challenges at hand. First, this land is inhabited by people who don't want the Israelites there. Second, the Israelites have no army, no weapons, and no means to be a conquering force. The first city they approach is Jericho. The city is surrounded by a great stone wall, impenetrable without the proper equipment. How can a tribe of peaceful people conquer a city that they can't get into? Along comes an angel of sorts, a man identifying himself as the commander of the Lord's heavenly force, or the heavenly force of God. In other translations, he calls himself the commander of the Lord's army. In modern terms, it would probably equate to some sort of spiritual general. I see this commander figure as a spirit guide. He appears to Joshua and gives him specific instructions on how to enter the city of Jericho. Methodically, they follow the instructions, walking around the wall in silence every day. And then on the 7th day, they make a lot of noise and the wall comes tumbling down and they go straight in. That was easy. But I'm sure your analytical mind is saying, "Okay, Mark, that's an entertaining story, but that could never really happen in real life." And honestly, you're probably right. Literal translations, literal interpretations present this as one of God's, quote, miracles. But as students of divine metaphysics, we believe in natural law. And we know that even when something seems miraculous, there is some sort of natural, physical, or spiritual law governing it, even if we haven't quite grown to understand how it all works yet. Miracle or not, there are important lessons hidden in these words, lessons that reveal secrets about our own nature. First, to satisfy our analytical mind, let's take a look at the story from a physical, scientific point of view. True, on the surface, it doesn't seem feasible that this could ever happen, especially so ceremoniously. But let's compare it to something in real life. Have you ever known someone with kidney stones? These are hard mineral deposits that can build up in your kidneys and which can be hard to get rid of and really painful. One of the treatments for kidney stones is a procedure called lithotripsy. The word lithotripsy is derived from the Greek words meaning pulverized stone. My oldest brother had some pretty bad kidney stones a few years back, and he said it was one of the most painful, uncomfortable things he has ever experienced in his life. To treat him, the doctors used the lithotripsy procedure. It involved focusing external shock waves on the area of the kidneys. The sound waves caused the kidney stones to break up into tiny pieces, which could then work their way out more easily. And trust me, my brother was a lot happier when that happened. So what do kidney stones have to do with Jericho? Well, think about what the Israelite priests did. They essentially performed a lithotripsy procedure on the wall. They walked in a great circle outside the city of Jericho, sending out vibrational energy to the entire perimeter of the wall each day, gradually preparing it. And then on the last day, they blew trumpets and everyone shouted loudly, and the vibrational force, an external shock wave of sorts, caused the stone walls to crumble away, just like kidney stones. Now the story doesn't seem quite so impossible, does it? Even if it is still pretty unlikely. Now that our analytical mind has had a chance to process all of this, let's take a look at it from a more spiritual point of view, with a little help from the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. Each element of our story has a symbolic meaning relevant to ourselves. The commander of the Lord's heavenly force is spirit, enforcing the neutral laws of nature. Joshua asked him if he served the Israelites or their enemies, and he replied, neither. He serves the heavenly force of God. Natural law does not serve one side or another, but serves as a neutral force that guides everything. This also reinforces the idea that God is not a respecter of persons. His sword represents our will, a double-edged tool designed to defend and protect, but which can easily do harm. It is a power that can be wielded by anyone who knows how to use it. The wall is a physical representation of the obstacles that we perceive in our thoughts and actions. The priests represent our spiritual trust and patience. Jericho is our stubborn intellect, what we think we know, rather than what there is to be known. Joshua is our wisdom and spiritual awareness in raw form. The name Joshua is a variation of Jesus's name. And if the timeline of the Bible is used to represent our path of spiritual unfoldment, where Adam is in infancy and Jesus is the wisdom of old age, Joshua might fall in that early stage of adulthood, aware of what we need to learn, but maybe not quite mature enough to be able to put it into action without a little help. The Ark of the Covenant is our own spark of divinity, that holy temple of our oneness with all that is. It is our creativity. The trumpets are waves of harmonious energies, and the shouts are expressions of determination and conviction. So with all of these elements in place, our story turns out to be about patience and perseverance. When we experience things in our life that don't meet our expectations, we get frustrated by the obstacles we perceive, represented by the wall. We tend to react to these frustrations, which only exacerbate the emotions we are experiencing. We lash out willfully with our emotional sword, which can protect and defend us just as easily as it can harm us. We lose sight of the fact that reacting out of fear and anger doesn't solve the problem we are perceiving, which might not be a problem at all. That's Jericho, our stubborn intellect. When we remember that the universe is designed to work in a certain way, that heavenly force of God or natural law, then we can think and see more clearly, working with the law instead of against it. Rather than pounding on a wall in frustration, we can trust in spirit, that commander of the heavenly force, and take time to patiently contemplate and respond, like the priests, in a way that overcomes our obstacles, like the wall. When we persevere, like walking around the city, and honor our creative nature, the ark, we can work more efficiently. When we raise our own vibration, like the trumpets, and understand that nothing can hold us back, then we realize that there might not be a true obstacle to be concerned with at all. In our story, there are 7 priests, and they work for 7 days, and they sound 7 trumpets. The number 7 represents contemplation and completion. In effect, they are meditating and concentrating for as long as is needed to realize that what they perceive as an obstacle is simply a task. And suddenly, any doubt they might have had simply crumbles away. This lesson can apply to anything in our life. How often do we decide that a situation is beyond hope without even trying? How many times do we see people blaming God or the government or their boss or their parents or whoever for making their life unbearable? How often do we become too frustrated to think clearly, or worse, assume that there's nothing that we can do, even when a solution might be sitting right in front of us? Our Joshua mind wants something to happen, but maybe it isn't quite far enough along in its understanding to realize the possibilities. But instead of charging ahead anyway, we can meditate on the situation, and with patience and determination, we can see that there is no one holding us back but ourselves. By trusting in spirit, understanding the laws of nature, and raising our vibration, doors open for us where a door might not even have been visible before. This is what's happening in Jericho. An example that many of us can identify with is a scene from the movie The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy has been kidnapped and locked away in the witch's castle. Her 3 friends know she's in there, but like Jericho, the castle presents itself as an impenetrable stronghold. How can they possibly get in to rescue her with no weapons, no tools, and no ideas? While the Tin Man and the Lion allow their earthly minds to fret and panic, the Scarecrow, the one who supposedly doesn't have the capacity to think at all, takes a moment to contemplate and then brilliantly knows exactly what to do. No longer burdened with a daunting challenge, within minutes, they're walking right through the door of this stone monstrosity in a way that no one else even notices. Easy peasy, right? When we can set aside our emotions and assumptions, only then can we be open enough to realize that there are other possibilities in any situation. Just because our stubborn intellect assumes that something is true doesn't make it so. Just because all we can see is a wall doesn't mean that there isn't a doorway we can walk through, or a ladder we can use to climb over, or a shovel to dig beneath it. Even the president of our country, in a moment of wisdom, once advised a class of graduating college students, never, ever give up. Don't give up. Don't allow it to happen. If there is a concrete wall in front of you, go through it, go over it, go around it, but get to the other side of the wall. Common sense tells us that pounding on a stone wall with our fists isn't going to accomplish much. So how do we go through it, or over it, or around it? By thinking carefully and creatively. In his 1998 book, Who Moved My Cheese?, author Dr. Spencer Johnson uses the metaphor of a wall to teach us about our natural tendency to resist change. The book was written to help people deal with disruptive changes at their job, such as a layoff. But the lesson applies to any challenges we face in our lives. The author uses the illustration of 2 cartoon mice named Sniff and Scurry, and 2 cartoon humans named Hem and Haw, all living in a matrix of walls that form a maze. Every day, they find cheese in a certain location, and both the mice and the men realize that there's a reliable place that they can go to find everything they need. It becomes a routine. But then one day, the cheese isn't there. The mice, acting purely on instinct, realize that there's nothing to be found, and they immediately start to sniff and scurry, searching and finding more cheese somewhere else. The men, on the other hand, hem and haw about their situation because that's where the cheese is supposed to be. And they get angry because their cheese is gone. And now they have nothing to eat. And because of that wall, all they can see is an empty space where their daily meal is supposed to be. Hem becomes paralyzed by his fear, while Haw learns that he won't find any more cheese if he doesn't try. The cheese becomes a metaphor for the lessons that he finds along the way. And he writes that newfound wisdom on the walls in hopes that his friend will find his way too. I'll let you read the book to find out how it all turns out. But one of the first messages that he wrote on the wall really stood out to me. What would you do if you weren't afraid? The key here is that conquering our limitations that we perceive in our life, those walls blocking us from where we want to be, isn't hard to do. We just need to be able to tear down our wall of fear and doubt, and in its place, build a new mindset that understands that possibilities are limitless when we give them a chance. One day, Randy and I were watching an episode of the Dr. Phil Show. Two women were having a disagreement. One woman was trying to find peace and justice from her frustration of being tormented by the second woman, while the second woman couldn't understand what the problem was and just continued to exacerbate the situation. Every time Dr. Phil tried to help that second woman see how much damage she was causing, she'd interrupt and make excuses to justify what she had done or to discredit everyone else. She goaded the first woman and repeatedly escalated a peaceful discussion into an argument over and over again. Finally, Dr. Phil stopped her and looked her dead in the eye and asked, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?" There was a gasp from the audience, and followed by a pregnant pause. But still, the woman couldn't take responsibility for the harm that she was causing, so the wall stayed up. And finally, the resolution was just to agree to ignore each other and stay out of each other's hair entirely. Not a perfect solution, but certainly better than it had been. The wall didn't go away, but they each found another path to follow that avoided the wall entirely. So what is the lesson? Even with the challenges as dramatic as a global pandemic, we don't have to be afraid of change. We can learn to accept change and see its blessings and adapt. We don't have to be afraid of the unknown. We can overcome our obstacles despite all the hurdles that might appear before us. We don't have to be afraid of losing control. We can influence our situations in positive and productive ways and find peace in them, even if we can't always determine what the outcome is going to be. In the end, these obstacles come from our ego mind, and like a wall, we tend to allow them to hold us back. You can tear down that wall, raise your vibration, weaken the attachments to things that don't serve you well, have patience, and when the time is right, shout from the highest hills that you can do great things, no matter what anyone else or your own ego says or does, or how much you feel shut out, or how long it takes. And when that wall comes down, walk straight through, conquering your stubborn fear, and knowing that you cannot fail, no matter what you do. Things might not always turn out the way you want them to, but they always turn out. So now I ask you, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? The choice is yours. And if you play your trumpet just right, you might just get both. Many blessings.